The night sky burned with streaks of fire as Daniel Reeves' ship tumbled through the upper atmosphere of a world he had never meant to visit. Alarms shrieked in his ears, flashing red warnings filling the cracked screens of his cockpit. His hands gripped the controls hard enough to make his knuckles white, fighting a losing battle against gravity and damage. The raiders had struck without warning, sleek black ships slicing out of nowhere, tearing through his cargo vessel as though it were paper. He had tried to run, tried to lose them in the asteroid field near the system's edge. But luck had not been on his side. One burning shot had cut into the reactor, and that was the end of the fight. Now all he could do was guide the wreck down and hope the planet below had air he could breathe. The hull screamed as it tore through clouds, chunks of molten metal peeling away. Daniel's teeth clenched, his body pressed into his chair as the ship fought against the pull of the atmosphere. His mind ran through 1,000 fears. The ship could explode, the ground could be toxic, the impact could turn him to ash. But in that storm of terror there was also a single stubborn thought that kept him moving. Humans were survivors. He was not going to die on some nameless rock without even trying. The crash came like the world itself wanted to tear him apart. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and the cargo ship skidded across rocky ground until it tore open in a deafening blast. Daniel was thrown forward, but his restraints held him long enough to keep him alive. Smoke filled the cabin. Every part of his body ached, bruises already swelling beneath his skin. He forced himself free of the wreckage, crawling through twisted beams and sparking wires until his boots finally sank into dirt. The air rushed into his lungs, thin, sharp, but breathable. He coughed hard, chest heaving, but relief flickered across his face. At least he wasn't choking to death. The land stretched out in a haze of strange color. Towering trees with silver leaves shimmered in the wind, their trunks rising like pillars of glass. The sky was tinged with green, clouds glowing faintly, as if charged with hidden lightning. It was alien in every sense, yet eerily beautiful. But beauty didn't matter. He needed water, shelter, and a way to send a signal if he wanted even a chance at rescue. The raiders were likely still hunting, but for now, survival was the only goal. Hours passed as Daniel scavenged what he could from the wreck. A half-burnt emergency pack, a flask for water, a plasma cutter with only one cell left. No food beyond, a few nutrient bars. He forced himself to keep moving, searching for anything useful. The silence of the alien wilderness pressed in, broken only by distant echoes he could not name. He pushed those fears down and reminded himself of the old saying, one step at a time. Then he heard it. Not the cry of an animal, not the wind. It was sharper, smaller, broken by pain. A voice, a child's voice. Daniel froze. He told himself it was a trick of his ears, some echo carried by the strange air. But then it came again, a weak, choked whimper carried through the trees. His heart clenched. Against every thought of self-preservation, his legs began to move toward the sound. He pushed through undergrowth, past twisted roots and branches sharp as glass, until he stumbled into the ruins of what had once been a village. Blackened stones lay in piles, huts torn apart as though by fire and blade. The air stank of ash and something coppery, metallic. Daniel's stomach turned. He had seen war zones before, years ago during border skirmishes, but this was worse. Whoever had attacked here had not spared anyone. Silence weighed heavy on the ruins, until he heard the sound again. He followed it, stepping carefully, his pulse hammering in his ears. Beneath the wreckage of a shattered wall, he found a small figure curled against the rubble. A child, skin pale with an otherworldly glow, long ridged markings running across the face like living tattoos. The clothes were torn, stained with blood, one arm bent at an angle that made Daniel's stomach twist. The child looked up, wide eyes filled with fear, pupils shaped like diamonds that glimmered faintly in the dim light. Daniel's breath caught. This was no human, but it was still a child. The training in his mind screamed at him to back away, to keep moving. He had no resources to waste, no time to involve himself in the affairs of alien tribes. Yet when the child weakly reached out, a trembling hand, his heart gave the answer his brain refused to give. He stepped forward, kneeling beside the small figure. His voice came out soft, almost shaking. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," the child whispered, something in a tongue he didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Plea, fear, desperation. Daniel swallowed hard, scanning the injuries. The broken arm, the cuts, the feverish skin. Without treatment, the child wouldn't last long. And here, in this burned ruin, no one else was coming. The raiders had made sure of that. Daniel pulled the flask from his pack, lifting the child gently. They flinched but didn't resist as he poured a small trickle of water to their lips. They drank greedily, coughing, then clutched weakly at his sleeve as though afraid he would leave them. Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I can't believe I'm doing this," he muttered. "I should be looking for a way out. Not playing nurse." But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. He couldn't walk away. Humanity had always been about more than just survival. It was about compassion, even when it made no sense. He lifted the child carefully into his arms. The weight was light, far too light, bones fragile against his chest. The child let out a soft sound, half relief, half pain, and buried their face against him. Daniel tightened his grip. "All right, kid, you're stuck with me now." The next hours blurred into a haze of exhaustion and determination. Daniel carried the child through the alien forest, every step a battle against his own fatigue. His body screamed for rest, but the small figure clinging to him drove him forward. He stopped only to check wounds, to whisper soft words the child couldn't even understand. But that seemed to calm them all the same. Strange sounds echoed through the night. Predators lurking unseen, but none dared approach. Perhaps it was luck, or perhaps some unseen instinct told them this human was not to be touched. By dawn, Daniel's legs felt like stone. He stumbled into a clearing where the land dipped toward a stream of clear water. He set the child down, gently, washing blood from their face, trying to make them as comfortable as possible. The sun rose strange and golden in the sky, casting light across them both. For the first time since the crash, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. He studied the child as they slept, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. He didn't know their name, their people, their world. All he knew was that fate had dropped this responsibility into his arms, and he had accepted it. He thought of the raiders, of the destroyed village, of the cruelty that had left this child alone. His jaw tightened. He had seen humanity at its worst before, but he had also seen it rise to greatness in the moments it mattered most. Maybe that was what this was about. Maybe he wasn't meant to run or hide. Maybe he was meant to stand. When the child stirred and whispered in their alien tongue again, Daniel gently squeezed their hand. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'll protect you, no matter what." The words meant nothing to the child, in language, but in spirit they carried all the weight of a vow. And though Daniel could not know it yet, those words would echo far beyond this moment, binding him to a destiny among stars he had never dreamed of. Daniel woke to the sound of rustling leaves and the soft hum of an alien dawn. The light filtering through the silver-leaved trees was sharp but gentle, glowing gold and green across the clearing where he and the child had rested. His body ached, as if it had been beaten with hammers, but when he turned his head and saw the small figure still curled safely beside him, his exhaustion dulled. The child's breathing was steady, though shallow. The fever had not passed, but at least they were alive. He shifted, testing his bruised ribs, then filled the flask from the stream and lifted it to the child's lips. The alien child blinked up at him with tired, diamond-shaped eyes, sipped weakly, and then let out a whisper he didn't understand. It was a single word, repeated softly, and the way it was spoken tugged at his chest. He didn't know if it was a name or a plea, but it was spoken with trust. He nodded anyway. "I'm here, kid. Don't worry." When he rose, he adjusted, the child in his arms again, holding carefully to avoid the broken arm. The decision he had made last night still felt strange in his mind. He could have left them there. He could have walked away, searching only for shelter and food. But no, he had chosen to carry the child, and now the choice weighed on him like an oath. He moved through the forest, each step careful. The alien world seemed alive with eyes he could not see. The strange hum in the wind carried distant cries, not all of them natural. He wondered if the raiders who had downed his ship had also burned the village. It seemed likely. If so, they could be anywhere. He needed to find civilization fast. As the hours stretched on, Daniel followed faint paths through the undergrowth. Once or twice he thought he saw flickers of movement in the trees, shadows keeping pace with him. He grew tense, gripping the plasma cutter at his side, but he did not stop walking. If someone was following, maybe it was a chance to find the child's people. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, the path opened onto a ridge, and Daniel stopped in his tracks. Below, nestled in a valley of stone and silver forest, rose a city unlike anything he had ever seen. Towers shaped like spears pierced the sky, glowing with pale blue energy. Bridges of crystal arched between buildings, and the walls that surrounded it shimmered as though woven from light itself. His breath caught in his throat. Whoever the child belonged to, they were not a primitive people. This was advanced, ancient, powerful. The child stirred in his arms, looking down at the city, and whispered another word, this one almost reverent. Their small hand tightened weakly on his sleeve, pointing toward the glowing walls. Relief filled their face, even through pain. Daniel exhaled. So that's home, huh? Guess I found where you belong. Getting there was not simple. The valley floor was guarded, and before Daniel had even reached the outer fields, shapes appeared from the trees around him. Tall figures in dark armor, weapons gleaming with strange light, moved to encircle him. Their faces were partially hidden behind angular masks, but their eyes glowed faintly beneath. Daniel froze, lifting his free hand slowly while holding the child close with the other. Easy, he said, voice calm. I'm not here to fight. The kid needs help. The warriors barked words in their own tongue, sharp and commanding. One stepped forward, leveling a long spear tipped with energy at his chest. Daniel understood the gesture clearly enough. Drop the child. Surrender. But when he tried to kneel and set the child down, the small figure clung to him tightly, whimpering in fear. Daniel looked at the warriors and shook his head. I'm not letting go. If you want to take us in, fine, but I'm carrying them. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then one warrior gestured sharply, and Daniel felt himself pulled by strong hands, dragged toward the glowing gates of the city. He didn't resist, only adjusted his hold to keep the child safe. The guards spoke rapidly to each other, their tone suspicious, even hostile. Daniel knew how this looked, a strange alien dragging one of their children from the ruins. He was already imagining prison cells. The city was even more overwhelming up close. The gates shimmered like liquid glass, parting to admit them, and within lay streets of stone and crystal glowing with flowing light. People turned to stare as the group passed. Tall beings with ridged markings across their faces, dressed in robes and armor, their expressions shifting between shock and anger as they saw the child in Daniel's arms. He felt their eyes burn, into him, judging, accusing. The guards led him into a vast hall at the heart of the city, its pillars rising higher than cathedrals, light cascading like waterfalls from crystal lanterns. At the far end of the chamber, seated upon a throne of living stone, was a woman who commanded the entire room simply by existing. She was tall, graceful, her ridged markings glowing faintly with power. Her eyes were piercing diamonds of silver, light, and her crown shimmered like starlight. This was no doubt the ruler here, the alien princess, though Daniel had no name for her yet. Her gaze fell on him like a weight, sharp and unyielding. The guards barked words, explaining in their tongue, pointing to Daniel. He caught fragments, a word repeated, outsider. The child stirred weakly in his arms, and when their eyes found the woman on the throne, they let out a soft, trembling cry. Mother, Daniel blinked. The word was in his language, clear as day, though the child had spoken nothing he understood before. But he saw the effect instantly. The woman's face changed, her breath catching as she rose from the throne and stepped forward. Guards stiffened but parted. The child reached out with their uninjured hand, whispering again. Daniel lowered them gently into their mother's waiting arms. The woman gathered the child close, murmuring words of comfort in her tongue, but her eyes flicked up to Daniel, filled with fire. The guards moved quickly then, seizing Daniel by the arms, forcing him to his knees. Voices rose around the hall, harsh and accusing. Daniel clenched his jaw. He knew this was coming. They thought he had taken the child, harmed them. He couldn't even blame them. But before the tension could break into violence, the child lifted their head weakly from their mother's shoulder. They pointed a trembling finger at Daniel, and in a voice small but clear spoke a single word. Protector. The hall went silent. Every guard froze. Every noble's whisper died in their throat. Daniel stared in disbelief. He had never heard that word from the child before, but somehow they had chosen it now. The woman on the throne, Princess Sarilith. Though Daniel would only learn her name later, looked down at her child, then at Daniel. Her gaze was unreadable, sharp as blades, yet softened by something unspoken. Slowly she raised her hand and the guards released him. The nobles erupted in protests, their voices sharp, angry. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. Outrage. A fragile human given such a title, it was unthinkable. But the princess silenced them with a gesture. She cradled her child, then turned back to Daniel. Her voice, though foreign, carried meaning even he could sense. The Diakor title had been spoken. The oath had been made, and by Xiari tradition, it could not be denied. Daniel swallowed hard as the realization sank in. He had stepped off his ship expecting death, carried a child because he couldn't abandon them. And now, in a hall of alien power, he had been given a name that bound him to a destiny he didn't understand. Protector, and there was no turning back. Daniel sat in the quiet of the chamber they had locked him in, staring at the glowing patterns on the stone walls. They pulsed faintly, alive with some energy he didn't understand. His mind was still reeling from the scene in the throne hall. One moment, he had been an accused outsider with guards ready to cut him down. And the next, the child had spoken one word that changed everything. Protector. The princess had looked at him as though the title carried weight older than time itself, and somehow she had accepted it. But instead of gratitude from her people, Daniel had only seen anger. To them, he was still an alien, fragile and weak. They hadn't seen him carry the child through fire and wilderness. All they saw was a stranger suddenly raised to honor he didn't deserve. The heavy door opened with a hiss, and 2 armored guards stepped in. They gestured sharply. Daniel stood slowly, brushing dust from his jacket. His ribs still ached. His muscles screamed for rest, but he kept his back straight. Whatever came next, he wasn't going to face it on his knees. They led him through winding halls of crystal and stone until he reached another vast chamber. This one was round, open to the sky above. Dozens of Xiari stood in high seats around the edge, their robes and armor gleaming. It was some kind of arena, not for blood sport but for judgment. In the center stood Princess Sarilith, her child resting on a cushioned seat beside her, guarded closely. Her gaze met Daniel's as he entered, calm but firm. A voice boomed from one of the nobles, sharp with disdain. The words weren't in his language, but Daniel could guess well enough from the tone. He was being challenged, tested. If he wanted to bear the title of protector, he would have to prove himself. Sarilith raised her hand, silencing the voices. She spoke, her tone steady. And though Daniel couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. Let the trials begin. The first challenge was strength. A warrior stepped forward, tall and broad, muscles coiled beneath dark armor. He carried a massive staff of crystal and metal, its head glowing faintly. Daniel was given only a shorter rod, simple and blunt. The crowd murmured, already certain of the outcome. The warrior attacked without hesitation, staff sweeping in arcs meant to crush bone. Daniel barely dodged the first strike. the impact shaking the stone beneath his feet. His heart raced. He wasn't a fighter, not in their sense. He had training, sure, every pilot did, but not to match warriors bred for battle. But what humans lacked in strength, they made up in cunning. Daniel shifted, letting the warrior's momentum carry him forward, then struck quick, jabbing at weak spots where armor bent. He didn't try to overpower. He aimed to outlast. Blow after blow rained down, but Daniel ducked, sidestepped, let the staff slam into the floor and walls, each time leaving the warrior more frustrated, more reckless. Finally, when the warrior overextended in anger, Daniel drove his rod against the joint of his knee. The giant stumbled, roaring. Daniel followed up with a strike to the side of the helm, and though it didn't knock the warrior out, it was enough to make him fall to one knee. The arena fell silent. Daniel stood panting, bruised and scraped, but still on his feet. Seralith's eyes shone with quiet approval, though many nobles scowled. The second challenge was endurance. They led him into a chamber of heat and stone, the air thick with smoke. A long path stretched before him, scattered with obstacles. Walls to climb, pits to cross, beams to balance upon. It was a gauntlet, designed to test not only the body but the spirit. Daniel set his jaw and began. His body ached with every climb, every crawl, but he refused to stop. Memories of his training days came back, survival drills, endless tests of patience and willpower. Humanity had always thrived not because it was the strongest, but because it refused to break. He carried that spirit with him now. At one point, the path led across a narrow beam suspended over a pit of glowing energy. The heat rose like a furnace, sweat stinging his eyes. His legs trembled, but he forced his breathing calm, one step at a time. Slowly, carefully, he crossed, never looking down. By the time he staggered to the end, his lungs burned, his skin was slick with sweat, and his muscles felt like fire, but he had made it. The crowd above watched in silence, some with reluctant respect. The third challenge was of the mind. In the arena's center, a table was set with strange objects, crystals, small metal pieces, shifting puzzles. A robed elder spoke, explaining rules Daniel couldn't understand, but Seralith stepped forward and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. She looked into his eyes and spoke one word in his tongue. Think. So he did. The puzzles were unlike anything he had seen. Glowing pieces that changed when touched, shifting patterns that resisted simple answers. He studied carefully, testing possibilities, adapting quickly. Where strength and endurance had been about surviving force, this was about curiosity, patience, and creativity, qualities humanity had always leaned on. Bit by bit, he found solutions. A crystal sphere lit up when aligned with others. A series of shifting tiles fell into place when he treated them like a map instead of a code. The crowd murmured with surprise as the puzzles yielded to his touch. By the end, Daniel had not solved everything perfectly, but he had solved enough. The elder gave a solemn nod. Daniel stepped back, chest heaving, sweat running down his brow. He looked to the child, who watched him with wide eyes, and for the first time he thought he saw something more than trust there. Admiration. The nobles erupted in argument, some shouting in protest, others conceding with reluctant respect. Seralith silenced them with a single raised hand. She spoke firmly, her gaze sweeping the arena, before finally settling on Daniel. Though he could not understand her words, he understood the meaning in her eyes. He had passed. The crowd began to disperse, though whispers and glares followed him. Some still hated the idea of a human holding such honor. But others, for the first time, began to see him as something more than an intruder. That night, Daniel was not locked in a chamber, but given a modest room overlooking the city's glowing streets. He sat on the balcony, bruised and battered, but alive, watching silver leaves shimmer in the night breeze. His thoughts turned to earth, to the quiet home he once dreamed of returning to, and to the strange path fate had carved for him here. He had never asked for this, He had only carried a wounded child because he couldn't walk away, and yet somehow that one act had placed him in the center of a people's future. He closed his eyes, whispering softly into the alien night. Protector, huh? Guess I better live up to it. Unseen by him in the shadows of the city, others plotted. Not everyone welcomed his success. Some saw him as a threat to tradition, a crack in the throne's strength. And in those shadows, plans were already forming to test him once more, this time not with trials but with blood. The city of the Ziari glowed under the twin moons, its towers shimmering like blades of crystal cutting the night sky. From his balcony, Daniel could see the soft lights that wove through the streets below, guiding people like rivers of stars. It had been days since the trials, and though his body still bore the bruises of each test he had endured, the title of Protector remained his, at least for now. But the days had not been peaceful. Whispers followed him everywhere he went. Some Ziari bowed their heads in quiet respect as he passed, acknowledging what he had proven in the trials. Others spat words he didn't understand, their eyes sharp with contempt. To them he was still a fragile human, a flaw in their traditions, a symbol of weakness brought into their court. Daniel had learned to keep his head down, but the child never left his side for long. The young heir, still healing from their wounds, clung to him with a trust that surprised him daily. Whenever he entered the chamber, their face would brighten, their small voice calling out the word that bound him to this strange destiny. Protector. That bond mattered more than the whispers, more than the glares. It gave him reason to keep walking even when doubt tried to drag him down. One evening he was summoned to the grand hall for a feast. The guards escorted him with stiff faces, and as he stepped through the tall archways, the sight before him stole his breath. The hall was vast, lined with long tables carved from glowing stone, their surfaces laden with dishes that shimmered in unfamiliar colors. The air was filled with the scent of spices, sharp yet sweet, and the hum of countless voices rose like a tide. Nobles in fine robes and armor filled the hall, their jewels reflecting the pale blue flames that lit the chamber. At the far end, upon her throne, sat Princess Sarilith, her presence commanding even in stillness. Beside her, the child sat quietly, wrapped in robes, their eyes scanning the room. When they saw Daniel, they brightened, calling softly, "Protector!" The word carried across the hall like a stone cast into water, silencing whispers for a brief moment. Sarilith gestured for him to sit at a place of honor near her table. Daniel moved carefully, aware of the stares drilling into him from every side. Some faces were curious, others openly hostile. He had grown used to it, but tonight, the tension felt heavier, as though the air itself carried warning. The feast began with music, strange instruments filling the air with notes that shimmered like light. Platters were passed, filled with foods Daniel barely recognized, fruits that glowed softly, meats cut into intricate shapes, drinks that sparkled in crystal cups. He ate carefully, wary of what his body could handle, but hunger pushed him to taste. To his relief, much of it was edible, though the flavors were unlike anything on earth. The nobles spoke among themselves, their voices rising and falling, glances flicking toward him often. Daniel tried to stay calm, to focus on the child's quiet laughter and the rare smile that touched Sarilith's face when she watched her heir happy again. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Then the peace shattered. It began with a sound too soft for most to notice, a faint click beneath the music. Daniel's instincts, honed by years of flying through hostile space, caught it immediately. He glanced toward the balcony high above, just as a shadow moved, a flash of metal. Without thinking, Daniel leapt to his feet. His body moved before his mind could catch up, throwing himself toward the child. The assassin's blade of energy streaked through the air, striking the stone where the child had been seated only a breath before. Gasps erupted around the hall. Daniel shielded the child with his own body, rolling across the floor. Pain seared his side as another strike grazed him, burning through his jacket and flesh beneath. He bit back a cry, tightening his grip on the small figure clinging to him. Guards shouted, rushing to surround the princess, but the attackers were already within the hall. Shadows broke from the crowd, nobles who had concealed weapons, their robes falling away to reveal armor. Betrayal. The court itself had been poisoned. Sarilith rose from her throne, her voice ringing like thunder, commanding her guards. But chaos spread quickly as steel met steel, energy weapons flaring in the grand hall. Daniel forced himself upright, blood soaking his side. The child whimpered against his chest, eyes wide with terror. He looked around desperately. He wasn't a warrior, not like the Ziari, but he couldn't let the assassins reach the air. His gaze fell on a fallen guard's weapon, a short staff glowing at one end. He grabbed it, setting his stance. "Stay behind me," he whispered, though he knew the child barely understood his words. Still, they clung to his back, trusting him. The first assassin lunged, blade whistling toward him. Daniel ducked low, jabbing the staff upward into the attacker's chest. The energy flared, sending the assassin stumbling back. Another came from the side. Daniel twisted, using his smaller size to slip under the swing, then slammed the staff into the back of the attacker's knee. They fell with a snarl, and Daniel struck again, knocking the weapon from their grasp. Pain burned through his side, slowing him, but adrenaline kept him moving. He wasn't fighting to win glory. He wasn't fighting to prove himself. He was fighting to keep the child alive, and that made him relentless. The hall roared with chaos. Guards clashed with traitors, nobles fled to the corners, and Sarilith herself fought with a blade of light, her movements swift and deadly. Yet even amid the fury, her eyes flicked to Daniel. She saw him standing bloodied, weapon in hand, shielding her heir without hesitation. Another assassin broke through the line, charging straight for them. Daniel braced himself, but before the blade could fall, a Ziari warrior who had once mocked him leapt into the path, striking the attacker down. The warrior gave Daniel a sharp nod. Respect, finally earned not by words or trials but by blood. Together they fought back the attackers until the hall was littered with fallen traitors. The last assassin was dragged down by guards, shouting curses in the Ziari tongue. Silence fell slowly, broken only by the crackle of blue flames and the ragged breaths of the survivors. Daniel staggered, the staff falling from his hands. His vision blurred as he pressed a hand to his bleeding side, but before darkness could take him, he felt a small hand gripping his, trembling but strong. "Protector," the child whispered again, voice filled with tears but also with pride. Daniel smiled faintly, closing his eyes for a moment. "Still here, kid," he whispered back. Guards lifted him then, carrying him toward the healers. Sarilith followed, her gaze fixed on him. In her eyes was something he hadn't seen before. Not just respect, but gratitude. She had seen him bleed for her child, stand against death with nothing but stubborn will. And though her court was divided, she knew one truth was now unshakable. The human was no longer just an outsider. He was protector in every sense of the word. But in the shadows of the city, the true hand behind the betrayal still lingered. The assassins had failed, but the war for the throne was only beginning. And Daniel, whether he wished it or not, was now at the heart of it. The healers worked through the night, their hands glowing with energy as they tried to close the wound in Daniel's side. He drifted in and out of consciousness, the voices around him fading and returning like waves on a distant shore. Sometimes, he heard the child's soft voice calling for him, sometimes Sarilith's firm commands to her guards. But what anchored him to life was the thought that he could not fall now. Not when the child trusted him, not when the princess had looked at him with eyes that finally believed. When morning came, the city was no longer calm. Bells rang through the crystal towers, a sound that carried both warning and sorrow. The assassination attempt had shaken the court. Many nobles whispered in fear, others in anger. Some demanded vengeance, while others demanded Daniel's removal, claiming that his presence had brought misfortune. Daniel forced himself to rise from the healing bed. His wound still ached, but he would not lie down while chaos threatened the throne. The guards at the door looked uncertain, but they did not stop him as he walked out, leaning on the wall for strength. In the throne room, Saralith stood tall before a circle of advisors, her voice sharp as a blade. She argued for swift action, for finding the traitors who had aided the assassins. But the advisors bickered, blaming one another, some even pointing toward Daniel. Their words grew loud until the doors creaked and Daniel entered. The room fell into silence. All eyes turned to him. His steps were slow but steady. He did not speak at first, only walked until he stood near the throne. Then, in a firm voice, he said, "The assassins were not the end. They were the beginning. Someone wants the throne weak. Someone wants the heir dead. If you waste time fighting each other, they will win without lifting another blade." The advisors muttered, but Saralith raised her hand. Silence returned. She studied him with eyes that no longer held doubt. "You believe the enemy will strike again?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "They will come openly now. They failed in secret, so they will try war. And they'll come soon." As if his words had called it forth, a messenger burst into the hall, face pale with terror. "Princess, scouts report enemy ships breaking through the outer defenses. They fly the banners of the exiled clans. Thousands march with them. They mean to take the city." The chamber erupted in alarm. Saralith's face hardened. She turned to her guards, giving swift orders to prepare the defenses. Then she looked at Daniel. "You spoke true, protector. Now tell me, how would a human face this?" Daniel felt every gaze burning into him. He swallowed, then straightened, his shoulders. "On Earth, we don't always win wars with strength. Sometimes we win by being clever, by using what the enemy doesn't expect. If you let me stand with your soldiers, I'll show you." The princess held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you will stand with us." The city prepared for war. From the walls, Daniel could see the horizon darken with the enemy force. Ships shaped like blades hovered above, lowering troops that glimmered with armor. Siege beasts moved in the distance, their massive forms stomping the ground as they advanced. The Scifi soldiers lined the walls with discipline, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. Yet Daniel could see fear behind their stern faces. They had not expected to fight a battle within their own lands, against their own kin. Daniel walked among them, speaking where he could. He told them to hold the line not just for their princess, but for the child, for the future. He pointed to the heir, who stood with courage beside Saralith at the central tower. Their small figure, refusing to hide, gave the soldiers a strength that no speech could. But Daniel had more in mind than words. He studied the city's defenses, asking questions that made some soldiers scoff, but others listen. Why not use the reflective crystal towers to blind the enemy ships? Why not flood the lower streets with burning oil to slow the siege beasts? Why not lure the enemy into narrow bridges where numbers could not matter? The Scifi commanders frowned at first, but as Saralith gave her approval, they obeyed. Soon the city transformed into a trap, its shining beauty now a weapon waiting to be unleashed. The battle began at dusk. The exiled clans advanced with a roar, their banners snapping in the wind. Fire rained from their ships, shaking the crystal towers. The walls trembled as beasts struck with massive claws. Soldiers shouted as enemies climbed with grappling lines. Daniel stood at the wall with a staff in one hand and a human-made flare in the other. When the first wave came close, he shouted, "Now!" At his signal, mirrors hidden within the towers shifted, catching the last light of the setting suns. Beams of blinding brilliance shot outward, striking the enemy ships. Pilots cried out as their controls failed, vessels crashing into one another. The first cheer of the Scifi rose. Then the siege beasts reached the gates. Their claws tore at the stone, each strike shaking the city. Daniel grimaced, lighting the flare and hurling it into the oil-filled trenches below. Fire erupted, engulfing the beasts in a storm of flames. They howled, stumbling in confusion, slowed long enough for Scifi cannons to strike them down. The enemy pressed harder, climbing the walls. Daniel fought among the soldiers, his wound aching but his spirit fierce. Each time an enemy broke through, he struck with his staff, pushing them back. The child's voice echoed in his memory, giving him strength. Protector. But the enemy leader was cunning. A massive ship broke through the defense, lowering troops directly into the central square. Their goal was clear: the throne tower and the air inside. Daniel saw it from the wall. He shouted for the soldiers to follow and ran through the streets, heart pounding. Flames lit the night, smoke filled the air, but he did not slow. He reached the square just as enemy warriors stormed toward the tower. Sarilith fought at the base, her blade flashing. Daniel rushed to her side, striking down one who aimed for her back. She glanced at him once, a wordless gratitude passing between them. Together they held the steps, but more came, endless waves. Then a cry rang out. The child had stepped onto the balcony above, refusing to hide. Their small hands gripped the railing as they called out to their people. The word carried through the chaos high and clear: Protector. The Xiari soldiers, hearing their heir's voice, surged with renewed fury. They rallied around the tower, cutting down the invaders. Daniel fought until his arms ached, until his body felt ready to fall apart. Still, he did not yield. Finally, with a great crash, the enemy leader fell, struck down by Sarilith's blade. The surviving attackers fled, their ships retreating into the night. The battle was over. Silence followed, broken only by the crackle of fires. The city was scarred, but still standing. The Xiari gathered in the square, their eyes turning to the throne tower, where their princess and heir stood, alive and unbroken, and beside them stood Daniel, bloodied, exhausted but unbowed. The people began to chant, not his name, for they did not speak it easily, but the word the child had given him: Protector, Protector, Protector. Daniel felt the sound wash over him, strange and powerful. He had come here as a stranger, an outsider with no place. Now he stood as part of something greater. Sarilith raised her hand, and the voices quieted. She looked at Daniel, her voice carrying across the square. This human has bled for our heir, fought for our city, and shown us strength beyond flesh. From this day, let all know, he is protector of the Xiari, by my word and by the will of the people. The cheer that followed shook the towers. Daniel, weary but smiling, looked toward the child. They smiled back through their tears, whispering once more the word that had bound their lives together: Protector. For the first time since leaving Earth, Daniel felt truly at home.